guys, it's Kim and welcome back for day 2 of our 21-day graphic design camp. And I'm going to do a quick run through of Pixlr's editor. You can reach that by going to pixlr.com/editor. What it'll ask you to do here is basically to either create a new image, open an image from your computer. You can even open an image from a website if you have the URL for it, or you can open an image from your library, and it could be Facebook, Pixlr, or anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by creating a new image here today. And you can title it whatever you want. So I'm going to title this Pixlr test. And then you're going to notice that if you pull on this drop down, there's some presets already made for you. And the cool thing about it is they do have like a lot of typical ad sizes, but they do also have movie sizes. So since I know I'm making a 1080p movie here, I'm going to choose that one. I always choose a transparent background because otherwise it will place a color as your background. I'll show you why I do that here in just a moment. Okay, so now we've got this open, and you'll see here in the lower left-hand corner that you can adjust the size of your area. So if I want to go down to like 75%, I just type that in and it will kind of give me a little bit larger viewing area. Also, I'm going to show you another little quick trick here. I've noticed, at least on my screen, I'm on a 5K iMac, so I have a really giant screen. I've noticed that these guys over here on the right are not showing up my layers palette. I was searching for the word there. So my layers palette doesn't all show up. It kind of hides behind the ads along the side here. I just kind of drug those over, and I'm going to quickly walk through a couple different things for you. Okay, so first of all, let's get an image in here. And images work a little bit differently in Pixlr than they do in Photoshop, where I would do a file place in Photoshop, but in here I'm going to do a layer, and I'm going to open image as a layer. So I'm going to navigate to my picture here that I'm going to use, and here it is. And so what it does is it opens it up in the size that I've opened up here. And so how I can check on that is I could use the move tool, which is the arrow with the crosshairs next to it. And I can rearrange that image any way I want to along the page here. So if I want to show more of the top of it, I can do that. So once I've got that done, I've got my image in here. Now you're going to notice over here on the right, the layers palette. The layers palette's very important, and it's something that you should really get used to always looking at in every single design that you do if you're using Pixlr. So you've got the layers palette over here. I can select different layers. The little check marks, I can turn layers on and off if I want to, but you always want to make sure you're working in the correct layer. Okay, so that'll always be over here. I can do lots of things over here. I'm going to go back over to my tools palette on the left here. And let's say I just want to crop and just use this part of the image. And I'm going to take my crop tool. I'm going to draw over the area that I want to keep. And then I'm going to hit return or enter on my keyboard, and it will crop my image down to that particular size. Now, if I ever want to undo things, this is on a PC, you would do Control Z, just like you would undo on like Microsoft Word. For a Mac, again, it's Control Z. And so now I have stepped backwards and I have my entire image back with me. Okay, so we've talked about the crop tool, we talked about the move tool. Let's go over to the marquee tool. Marquee tool is pretty cool because I can select different things on an image. Like if I wanted to, let's see, let's come back to this little coffee cup here. I want to select that coffee cup, but I want to delete everything else on this page. So what I could do is I could go to Edit, Invert Selection, and backspace delete on my keyboard, and it gets rid of everything else but what I've selected. That's the Invert Selection tool. Now, if I want to get rid of these marching ants on the screen, I would just do either a Control D or a Command D for deselect. And then now all of those have been deselected. I'm going to undo what I just did by Command Z or Control Z on a PC. I'm going to deselect, Control D or Command D, and I've got that. Now I can also up here in the kind of menu bar, I can change whether I want it to be a circle or an oval or a rectangle square. And then I can also choose to feather. And what feathering does is it kind of puts a little bit of a blur on the edges. The higher number that you use for your feather, the more blur that you're going to get. So just kind of keep that in mind. So the next thing I'm going to show you is the Lasso tool. And there's actually two tools attached to this. One is just your freehand lasso tool. Okay, and you'll see it's kind of hard to see it. I'm going to try it. Let me try it over here. So you can see over here, I can And when I let go of it, I'm just clicking and dragging. It's selected this area. What's kind of cool about this is, like, especially if you're cutting people out or you're cutting objects out of things, you want to get rid of the background, you can use this tool to do that. Now notice I am freehanding this, so it's not really perfect. So if I did that, edit, invert selection, and delete, you're going to see that I got a little bit of, it's kind of crummy around the sides. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the other tool up here, which is I think it's the Polygonal Lasso Tool. And what you can do is, I typically like to zoom in really far. So let's go to like 200%, okay? And then I'm going to kind of adjust myself around the page here a little bit. So if I want to cut that keyboard out, what I would do is I would get really close to this, and I'm just going to start clicking. You can kind of see a little, it's kind of hard to see it on this background, but I do lots of little clicks. And I make my way all the way around this keyboard here. And you'll notice that oh, see, look what happened. Because I use the, let's see if I can backspace delete one here. Nope, I can't. It clears the entire thing. So let's do that. Yep, so let's come back down here. I'm just going to close that area. There we go. So you'd want to work in smaller places where you don't have to kind of, move yourself around the keyboard a lot. But what that did there was I was able to get a little bit closer. And notice I had a 0 feather, so I'm still kind of missing some little parts here. But if I kind of worked my way up, let me increase my feather to 1, hit enter. And now let's do a little bit more of this lasso tool. Back when I used to teach high school journalism, this was probably my students' favorite tool to use. And I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to double click so that I can close that selection, backspace delete, and deselect. And you're going to notice it's a little bit, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit more here. You're going to notice, see, it's a little bit softer on that edge instead of this harsh one right here. And so that's a tool that I really like to use if I'm trying to cut things out and to kind of give it a soft feel. It looks a little bit more natural that way. So let's zoom back out here. I'm going to just type in 75% and I'm going to undo everything that I just did here. I'm actually going to kind of work my way up my history over here on the right. And as you can see, I can back myself up pretty far right there. All right, so now we've got the magic wand tool. And what I can do with that is I could just select colors of things. And if I want to add or subtract from my selection, I could do that with either the plus tool or the command tool, and on a PC that would probably be the control key. But I could, take out parts of this if I don't want it selected. But that would be a way to mass select a lot of things that are of the same color. And you can change the tolerance, meaning how much of that particular color that it tolerates. Okay, so our next tool we're going to look at is the pencil tool. And you've got a bunch of different types of pencils you can do. You can do a regular plain pencil. You can change it to a trail. And then you can also change the size of it too, and it will make it larger and it'll make a lot of adjustments. You can change how transparent it is, or how heavy or how light it is. Okay, so we're going to do that. Next tool we've got here is the brush tool. And with the brush tool, I can do all sorts of things. I can, again, it looks a little bit more like a brush. I can click on that brush tool and I could change what I'm putting on there. So I could add some little stars to it. I could add like a little asterisk flower. And the other thing you're going to notice is there's a more key here. And if I want to, I can look at all sorts of different ones. If I want makeup, I want to add some eyelashes. Those are the eyelashes available. I click add and it adds it to my brush palette. I could give this guy some, right? Give my little coffee cup a little eyelashes. So that's a little fun thing that you can do too. So that's something that's very similar to Photoshop as well. We also have an eraser tool where I can change the size of it, which is all down here. If I want a really big one, I could do that. Notice how the edges are a little feathered. The reason, because I have a feathered brush selected. If I want it more harsh, I can do that and it will give it a more harsh outline. And then you can change the types of brushes that you use. You can load brushes as well. The brushes, like I say, they duplicate as erasers as well. You just have to make sure you're in the correct tool in order to do that. Next up is the paint bucket tool. And so what I could do is I can come down here. I could select a color. I can adjust specifically what color I want. And I could click in here and it's going to fill all of that similar area with that color. And you're actually able to use the marquee tool in conjunction with your paint bucket tool. So that's kind of a cool little feature. Let's move over to the gradient tool. Now we're going to head over to our layers palette. Remember I was telling you we want to make sure we're kind of paying attention to that. I'm going to turn off by unchecking layer 1, which is our image. And then I'm going to make sure that layer 0 is selected because it's the empty layer. And then what I can do here is I can simply click and drag across the page and it will fill that page up with whatever gradient has been selected. So if I click up here on this gradient tool, I can actually click like a whole slew of pre-made gradients that they have in there. And depending on where I draw my cursor across the page is how that gradient is going to appear. I can do it linear or I can also do it radial. Radial means it comes from like a circle. And so you can do it all sorts of ways. So if I want the circle to come from a quarter, I can do that. And that's kind of fun because you can do lots of cool backgrounds with it as well. And then you can change like different things like the spread method and the mode. Mode is more like how the colors are going to appear on your screen. So go ahead and play around with that. If you want to create your own custom ones, I usually just kind of pick one of the main ones. If I click on the first color, it will appear right here. Then I can click there and I can adjust it. And you'll see it adjust right up here on the fly. I can hit OK and I can draw across the page and there's my gradient. I can also change the other color as well. I can also just simply click in here and add additional colors if I'd like. So our next one is the clone stamp tool, and we're going to bring back our image for this one. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use my little zoom button here, and I'm going to use my hand button to move my image around. There's a couple little specks here. I don't know if you can see them. Let's zoom in a little bit more. A couple of specks on the page. I want to get rid of those. I'm going to use a clone stamp tool to do that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick an area pretty close to that, hold down the command key, and I'm just going to click. And I'm going to come over here. Why is this not working? All right, so I want to make sure again that remember we turned on that layer 1 over here, but I didn't select it, so it wasn't working for me. So again, that's why it's really important to really make sure you're paying attention to your layers. And if things aren't working, it's probably because you're on the wrong layer. So I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to hold the command key down and click. I'm going to move my cursor over that little first spot, and now that's gone. I'm going to hold the command key here, and I'm going to click over that spot, and that one's gone. Now notice if I try and do this one, it's coming from over here, which is fine, but lots of times I want to try and make sure that I'm coming from a spot that's very close to this. Because for example, okay, let's say that I grabbed right here and I come down here. What it's going to do is it's going to make another line. Okay, so you'll see, even though I'm kind of going a little crooked here, it's still grabbing that same area. And see, now that I move my cursor up, it's moved around there. So that's kind of something to keep in mind there, is like you always want to grab the color close to it, and that's kind of how you would fix things. So let's zoom back out, and to do that I am holding my shift key down, and I can just zoom out that way too. Otherwise you have to type it in the lower left hand corner. The other thing, you have your drawing tool. This is actually going to give you shapes, and all of your shapes are available up at the top. You choose how transparent they are, what type of how the colors are going to appear. Do you want a border on it? Do you want the shape to fill with the color? And what color do you want it to fill with? Okay, next up we have the blur tool. So I'm going to click on that, and what that's going to do is it's going to blur whatever I'm just clicking and dragging, and I'm going to zoom in here a little so you can see what we just did there. You can see that that kind of blurred it up a little bit there, okay? The next one is the Sharpen Tool. And so I'm going to take that, and now you're going to notice that as I click and drag across the screen that it's really trying to sharpen that image. You can do that with pictures, letters, but you're going to notice that it does make it a little bit more grainy. Okay, next up is the Smudge Tool. And when you use the Smudge Tool, that's what it does, is it smudges your image around. Next up is the Sponge Tool. I'll show you what the Sponge Tool does. Sponge Tool kind of takes your design and it takes that color and it just, you know, like a sponge does, it takes the color and it kind of bleeds it. Next up is the Dodge Tool, and what the Dodge Tool does is it will try and adjust the color. Now notice that since I'm working with a midtones choice, it didn't really do much there, but if I go into the shadows, it's going to change that. If I go into the highlights, it's going to change that. Notice that it's not taking into account the dark because it's a dark color, not a highlight, which is the white. So you're able to do a lot. You could do a lot of like deleting backgrounds. If you have that kind of stuff, you could use that tool for it. Next up is the Burn Tool. The Burn Tool, you're not going to notice much here because again, we have the midtone selected, but if I go into the shadows, you're going to see that a little bit of things change here. And with the highlights, again, that's what's happening because we're burning the color into it. So it kind of works in opposite of what the Dodge Tool does. Next up, you have a red eye reduction. So most cameras are kind of avoiding the red eye thing right now, but it still happens sometimes. So you can use that. You just simply click on an eyeball, click in the middle of it, and it should fix the red eye for you. And then we also have the spot healing. And that basically can kind of lighten up a particular area of your design, but still keeps some of the background aligned with it. All right, and then we've got the pinch and the bloat tool. So with the bloat tool, I just simply click once and it bloats things out, almost like that crazy eyeball effect. With the pinch tool, it's going to do the opposite. Finally, you've got the eyedropper tool. So if I want to click and grab a color, for example, let's zoom out here once. Let's use that text tool. I'm going to show you a little something here. So with the text tool, I just have to click and type. Day 1, how to use Canva. Remember, actually what this does is you're able to, it pulls all of the fonts that you have available on your computer to use. Now, not all the fonts work very well with Pixlr. So like my umbrella font for my branding does not work very well on it. You'll see that it chops off any of the descender fonts, or descender letters. But with most of them, it works fine. So if I go and find my most favorite font, Montserrat. I'm able to get that whole thing on there. I can change the color here. And once I click on that color, I can actually adjust it depending on whatever I use with the eyedropper, which is kind of a cool little effect. I like that a lot. Okay. So you can do that. So that's just another thing that you can do with either the eyedropper there or with the text tool itself. I'm going to click OK. And then you're going to notice too that it does create a new layer for your text. So that's a nice benefit because then you can actually rearrange them and drag them around the screen. And let's kind of run through the menus up here. This is where you can save, you can print things if you want, you can log in and it'll save some of your designs for you. You do have your edit where you could free transform, you could distort things, you have all sorts of little options here. You can also change your image size, which is the actual size of the image versus the canvas that the image is on. So there's a lot of things you can do there. You could flip your canvas around if you want. Notice it flips the canvas, but it doesn't flip the text on that one. All right, and then you've got your layers. So usually when you're placing an image, like I said before, you want to open the image as a layer. So you can do that here. And then you can actually merge your layers together if you'd like using those. And then anytime you want to rotate, you could do that. You can do all sorts of things here. You've got a lot of adjustments that you can do from a photo editing standpoint. If you want to change the brightness and the contrast of your particular image, you can do that here. And there's a lot of filters. So if you want to polar coordinates, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff with this. If I want to blur it, I can do that. Oh, you know what? Let's try this. There we go. I was on the actual text layer and that's why it wasn't working. So I can adjust like what this is going to look like. I can make it be monochromatic or just using the color. You can do all sorts of stuff with that. You're able to zoom in and zoom out from up here as well. And then if you want, test your language skills, you can change your language up here as well. And then they do have your help and any of these other things that you could search for as well. And that covers our day 2, how to use Pixlr. One thing to kind of remember here too is that the Pixlr website, online website app is totally different than the one that you can actually download. So kind of keep that in mind. The one that you can download, you can only do image editing with. You can't do like full-blown graphic design like what I've done here. You know, you got a lot more options here with the online software. So that's just something to keep in mind. Well, this wraps up day 2, how to use Pixlr, and we will see you guys tomorrow.